All of us know so well that the story of Christmas is the story of hope. But do we actually understand the context in which the story of hope was presented? I really believe if we had a better understanding of the context in which the story of hope was given to us, we will manage to live much better in these uncertain times that we face right now. If I have to use a few words to try and introduce us into this topic, I would perhaps use these words: grieving in the presence of hope. In 1 John verse 9 we read that the true light that brought light to all men entered the world. And then in verse 12 it continues in 1 John that everyone who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. So the first two hints we have here is that the true light came in and it gave access to all of us to become children of God. A number of years ago, I met somebody in the United States, and I remember him very well because I was very impacted by his physical stature, 6'8", a block of a man, a wonderful believer. But he met with me and he started telling me how he dragged his feet to Africa. His wife wanted to come to Eswatini, it was Swaziland at those days, and he said he doesn't want to come because he's got nothing to bring or to give. He was a nuclear scientist. And when I met with him, he shared his story with me. He said he stood there and he felt so uncomfortable as he watched all these orphans and the people feeding them and didn't know what to do. So eventually he found a pipe that was leaking and he started fixing this pipe. And he said to me, you know, George, while I was busy fixing the pipe, I could feel there was somebody next to my leg the whole time. But I didn't pay any attention because I was working. And so eventually when I fixed the pipe, I looked down. And there was this 5-year-old boy. And this poor boy stretched his neck back as far as he could, looking up at this giant of a man. And he said to him, will you please be my father? And this 6'8" man just started weeping as he shared with me. He said the moment he heard those words, for the first time, the baby of Jesus, the coming of the light, made sense to him. He said for the first time he realized as he looked at that child that he was indeed that child looking for a father. As that child was in grief and desperate and he needed a father, this man in the United States discovered that he was indeed in grief and he needed a father. And that is the good news story that we're trying to tell. It is such a familiar story. But before we carry on, I want to tell you one more verse in John 1, verse 5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. That's so beautiful. That's so incredible. And that's where our story starts today. We need to understand that when the Son of Man entered this world, he entered a dark world. He entered a broken world. He entered the world that faced hunger and sickness and huge physical abuse. He entered the world that was broken, with many, many injustices taking place. Just think of a moment about Mary, the young woman with child out of wedlock. Yes, of course the angel made a promise. Yes, the promise, your son will become the king. But back at the ranch, reality, the shame, the discrimination. Think for a moment, I wonder what her mother and father had to say to her when they sat down with her and they tried to understand the shame that she brought upon her family name. And it doesn't end there. This is the story of Jesus. This is the story of that baby in a manger, all the way right through to the very last moments, to the very cross. As he was hanging on a cross, the very words, my God, why have you forsaken me? Right there, that moment, Jesus was in deep grief in the presence of hope. Of course he knew he was about to bring salvation. Of course he knew he was about to set people free, to bring restoration and reconciliation. And yet, the world that he was in at that moment was dark and broken. In the last few years, here in Africa, and specifically the last 2 years in Africa, we learned what it means to say there's a gift in a storm. Of course we know that we have a good Father. He's compassionate for us. He's watching out for us. But you know, when he allows a storm in our lives, we can believe and know that there's a gift in the midst of the storm. And you know, these storms that rage around us in Africa, I'm sure you experienced them. You know what they did to us? They made us more compassionate. I can say in the last year in Hands at Work, we have made it more personal, more compassionate about the work that we do on a highly personal level than ever before. And this is not exclusively in Hands. We saw that with the disciples of Jesus. Mark 8, where Jesus fed the 5,000, is a brilliant example. We read in Mark 8 verse 1, in those days, just like days of today, in those days, a large crowd gathered. And now I can see with my eye how Jesus took his disciples and he called them together. And then he said to them, he said, look at the crowd. Jesus used these words. He said, I have got compassion on these people. They have not eaten for 3 days. You give them something to eat. You know, the disciples found every reason in the book not to feed them. Sent them home. There was a hardness. And yet the very same disciples, a very short time after that, merely 2-3 years after that, we read in the book of Acts, as we see the early church, that this very same disciples compassionately and deeply cared for the widows and the orphans in their community. What happened? I believe as they went through the storms with Jesus, they discovered the gift in the storm and made their hearts soft and compassionate. May this Christmas bring lots of hope to you and your loved ones, even though many of us are grieving. We hold on to these words. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. May the light of Jesus shine brightly in your life, and especially in this season. May you bring hope in a grieving